Beside me to get into all that Jack has just set up for us, we have Fiona Brady from Free Now, Ray Coyne from Dublin Bus, Alan Parker from Bus Éireann, and Elaine Howley from Sage Advocacy. You're all very welcome, and thank you so much for coming here today. I suppose Jack has just highlighted, what a bad transport experience looks and feels like. But we're going to try in this discussion to highlight best practices in terms of accessibility and, what inclusivity looks like and how it can be achieved everywhere. But before we get into specific examples, I think it's really good if everyone knows where people are coming from. So Fiona, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us why you're here today?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Hi everyone, my name is Fiona Brady and I'm the Head of Operations and Public Affairs for Free Now. As Niall mentioned, Free Now is Ireland's leading multi-mobility app, and we're delighted this year to have partnered with IWA to work on improving transport and more accessible options. Transport for me is the moving force behind every community, and we need to serve that community responsibly. So by investing in technology and the physical infrastructure, we can make improvements and make that happen.
Great. Ray, how about you?
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm Ray Coyne, CEO of Dublin Bus, largest public transport provider in Ireland. Pre-COVID, we carried 140 million customers. Last year, we carried 70 million customers on essential journeys. We do that on 1,000 fully accessible fleet, 3,500 employees, and working and engaging with the communities that we serve. I suppose the proudest part of my role is that it's public transport, and public transport is for everybody and should be accessible to everybody. Jack has outlined some areas where we do need to improve upon, and hopefully through the debate today we'll get to see some good initiatives that have been there and what we really need to focus on in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Alan Parker.
Good morning, I'm Alan Parker. I'm Chief Customer Officer with Bus Éireann for the last 4 years, so responsibility for the service delivery function. That's everything our teams do day in, day out to deliver for our customers. I think Bus Éireann, 2,700 employees throughout the country. We operate over 1,000 vehicles and 250 odd routes. I think in pre-COVID, carried 89 million customers in a year, and I think sort of just to give a feel for the sort of the reach of Bus Éireann, about 95% of the Irish population is within about 5 kilometres of a Bus Éireann bus stop. We look at wide, diverse network. We have our city services, Cork, Limerick, Galway, Waterford, rural stage carriage commuter services. We also run expressway intercity services, and then we administer the the school transport scheme on behalf of the Department of Education. As a business, very, very focused not only on high quality, safe public transport services, but making sure they're accessible to all, irrespective of age, disability, mobility issues. I think Jack, in his keynote speech, did sort of highlight issues where it didn't work, and we're very focused on making sure that doesn't happen, and that we understand the challenges that are there for our customers, and that we address those and make transport accessible for everyone.
Great. And Elaine, will you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Elaine Howley. I've had impaired vision since birth, and I've spent my whole adult life promoting independence and advocating for access to education, access to employment, access to information, cultural activities, social event, full participation for people with disabilities. But core to that for anybody with a disability is public transport that's available, accessible, reliable, and barrier-free. I'm somebody who completely relies on public transport. I don't drive a car. I can't decide to cycle to work today because it's a nice day. Every day I use public transport in my job. And I represent people with disabilities on a number of committees, including the Transport Accessibility Committee. I know that increased funding has gone into public transport. I know there are an awful lot of positive initiatives. But I also know from people with disabilities that the day-to-day experience is not necessarily improving at the same rate. So safe spaces like footpaths, physical access, it's not improving in line with the funding that's going into it. So there's a mismatch that needs to be resolved.
Well, let's maybe drill into that a little bit later. But I may start first by kind of getting a sense of achievements that have been made in recent years. So, Ray, do you want to give us a sense of what Dublin Bus has done to make its fleet accessible and its services accessible?
Yeah, so if I've been in Dublin Bus for 33 years and we're 35 years old last week. But if I look back on when I started out in Dynbrook Garage, we had a route timetable, route number 1. And there was about 6 times in that timetable that were in red font and everything else was in black font. And that was a wheelchair accessible bus. And that was in the late 90s. And people used to, like Jack said, people used to ring to make sure that that bus was going to be on at that time. And it was the only bus route in Dublin. So a decision was made back in the late 90s that we would only buy low floor accessible buses as the industry was starting to produce these. So that took 12 years to implement into the fleet. But we did it at the start, not knowing, well, you know, the reliability, how the buses would function. But what quickly happened then was customers got to use the bus, because as you roll them out into routes, customers who use wheelchairs, customers who, you know, temporary ambulant, they would then get on the bus. And those customers then said to us, listen, it's great that I can actually get on the bus now. But now when I'm in the bus, you know, the hand poles are just steel hand poles. There was no space for the wheelchair. There was steps at the back of the bus. So people, you know, there was only about 7 seats downstairs that were accessible. So we engaged with the community, started making some changes in the interior of the bus, and that was your bell pushes, your colour contrasts and hand poles. What happened then, the next step is, well, the drivers are now encountering customers that wouldn't have encountered before. So, you know, the customer feedback was, look, you need to have your employees clued into our requirements and how we would go about using your service. So we put a training programme in. We had a disability activist, Dermot Walsh. I was an accessibility officer in Dublin Bus, and I toured many parts of Dublin with Dermot. He actually gave our courses on disability and inclusion in the workplace. After that then, customers who'd never used the bus and who may have acquired a disability or were starting to learn how to use the bus, we had to teach those customers how to actually interact with our service, again through feedback in the community. And then probably the proudest thing I think I have in Dublin Bus in terms of what we do now is the Travel Assist programme. So a lot of people tuning in would know Roger Flood. He's the main man for that, and he has a team behind him. And that is where we will go out to a customer, teach them how to use the service, whether it's the bus, the Lewis, the train, get them comfortable with using public transport. And the reason I tell that story is you have to start somewhere, and then you start learning what the next iteration is and the next iteration. So as I look back now, fully accessible fleet. So all the infrastructure on the bus is there. We have to put in some induction loops now, and that's the next stage for all buses. But how we go about that, it has to be community into the organisation, not the organisation telling the community what to do. I don't have the lived experience, but I do have empathy, and we do communicate. And what we did see was the community were open to engaging with us because they saw that we were making some changes. And then they knew, I didn't know at the time, they knew they would lead to bigger changes. Then what you have is the infrastructure. The bus stops weren't accessible. And there's a lot of work that's required to be done there. And the councils have done some good work. Now you're involving a lot of multi kind of agency stakeholders. And again, from my point of view in Dublin Bus, the closer the decision makers are to the end users and the customers, the more effective the decisions tend to be and the faster they tend to be. And I think that's super important as we look at the massive change that's coming with infrastructure and the technology. This is a new cycle again. And so I think that aspect needs to be cherished, that the end user is, face to face with the decision makers. And for me, that was me in Dublin Bus, and you go out and meet the community. So so we have made some really good strides, and I think there's still a lot of work to do, obviously, but I think once you make some intervention, you get to learn so much more, and then you can build upon that. Yeah,
great. Alan, do you want to give us a sense of Bus Éireann's achievements in this area?
I think probably similar to Ray. I think that if I pick maybe 3 key items, I think that the investment in the fleet is key. We're now, even last year, we took in 202 new vehicles into the fleet, all fully accessible. So that now has got us to a point where we can sort of increase the number of services that we're marketing and advertising as being fully accessible. So all the city services, all the town services, low floor, fully accessible. Our coach fleet is now fully accessible as well. So look, I think that really has made a significant difference. On board the vehicles, again, that work of understanding the challenges that the customers have. So making sure there's suitable space around the wheelchair area. Voice announcements, we're rolling out voice announcements we're about 50% of the fleet completed. Hopefully the rest, the whole fleet by the end of this year. But again, helping those with vision. I'd say helping every single customer, but with those with sort of vision impairments as well. So that's been another key initiative. It's interesting, Ray mentions the travel assistance scheme. We're now going to trial that in Cork and learning from the success that the scheme has been in Dublin. So again, supporting people who want to use our services and help them. And I think by sort of communicating that, hopefully they'll find actually the strides and the improvements that have been made. And it's maybe not as difficult as maybe some perceive, but we do still have a lot of challenges. I think the other side, significant investment in the infrastructure. So making our bus stations accessible, making our bus stops accessible. So again, the NTA have committed 12.5 million investment over the next 5 years to us to work on those accessibility issues. So again, that will help us address a number of the challenges around our stops. And I think that the final piece where we've really improved is listening to our customers. So understanding what are the challenges they do have using our services. How do we address those? And there isn't one single silver bullet. It's lots of small issues that we're picking up through we have a user group. Again, just listening to that feedback and saying, actually, well, how can we really address those issues and improve the situation and make it as accessible as possible?
Great. And Elaine, when you're hearing those initiatives that have been in place, is there anything like through your work with Sage Advocacy, but also with your previous role with NCBI, are there initiatives that stand out for you as successes or ones where you go, oh, well, that, really needs work?
There are a huge number of successes. I mean, Ray mentioned the 90s was a big turning point. I think transport providers really started listening to disabled people and engaging in with us. So I was personally involved in a lot of the work with each of the companies around audible announcements that started probably in Irish Rail, I think, with Dublin Bus, the whole area of colour contrast. And, we had a new livery that was made buses physically really, really visible. We had yellow bus stops. We had yellow poles inside the buses. And with Lewis, there was lots of engagement. Slightly after they picked an inaccessible colour for the outside of their fleet, but they subsequently rectified it somewhat with a yellow line around, a stripe around the side of it. And subsequently, since that, engagement has been huge with them. Bus Éireann equally transforming their stations that were quite inaccessible for many years, and I am delighted to hear of audible announcements improving on Bus Éireann, because I've spent many hours wondering where I am and stopping people who are getting on and off to ask them, where are we now? So that's all good news. I suppose engagement is huge. There are where you can rely on things like just really straightforward examples. Lifts when they work, audible announcements when they work, ramps when they work. But the worry is, and the concern that people always have is, well, when they don't work, is their commitment, and it often happens, is their commitment to maintaining and repairing things as they don't work and doing that quickly and retaining what is working. So, there's a constant uphill battle to hold on to the things that are working as new developments emerge. Are we suddenly faced with, at one stage we were shown new buses that had 45 shades of grey inside the bus and no colour contrast. Now, fortunately, that got changed, but it was an uphill struggle to change it, and it also cost a lot of money. These things don't get retrofitted cheaply. So the key really is engagement with disabled people at the early stages, at the planning stages, before decisions are made, and really listening. I think that's key. And it is improving, but could continue to improve more.
Yeah, because I think, it's the reliability that that there's a lift, and if it's not working, it could mean you going home for the day or somebody going home for the day, whereas, and I think that's something that you hear a lot from people in the community.
Yeah, or not turning up to your meeting. Like, the impact on lots of people's lives and lots of people's days is massive, you know, when things go wrong, yeah.
And also, we all love the audible announcements. They help everybody, so why not have them? Fiona, in terms of Free Now and your provision of the largest wheelchair accessible fleet in Ireland, which is brilliant, but will you give us a sense of the taxi industry in general, and what are the policies in place, and are they actually working?
Yeah, sure. So as Jack mentioned, we're at about 20% of our fleet is wheelchair accessible now. It's a bit lower across the country, but there is a policy in place since about 2010, which means all new vehicle licences have to be wheelchair accessible. So 10 years on now, we can see obviously that is a prime example of policy having an impact on the industry. But I think, again,
slow though, isn't it?
It's very slow. So we do need to look beyond that. And we looked at, it kind of strikes me when we're talking about this in everyone's different modes, that it's not just one mode. We all have our bits to do, and it has to be a collaboration. So for anyone to have the freedom to live their lives, to go to meetings, to socialise, you need to have access to all these modes. And taxi is an important one as well, because it's on demand. It's when you want to go out, it's when you want to socialise. And I know there's still the night link, or it's back now, isn't it? But it is. But it is a really important mode. And what is important is that we start harnessing the technology to kind of bring these all together, and together having all those modes accessible will actually improve reliability overall in a transport system. And
Ray, do you think technology is one of the key things for inclusion?
Yeah, for sure. I mentioned earlier that as we come into the new technology, that kind of life cycle of change is going to happen again, because we're going into areas that we don't particularly know yet. But I think one of the key points, and Jack mentioned earlier, it's universal design. So what we're looking at now in terms of technology is just make it as easy as possible. That's what technology should do, make things easier to use. If you can do that for everybody, that's great. You don't have to segment it out and say, well, listen, we'll make it really good for here or here. Just make it good for everybody, and you're going to have natural benefits. So I think as technology and public transport merges, what we definitely need is absolutely simple fare structure or simple ticketing system to navigate and book journeys and stuff like that, right? So, and then you've got the multimodal. So that's mobility as a service in the industry. So MAS, that's where the industry is certainly going to go. How far it goes down will be down to the regulator, down to the government in terms of their aspirations. But what you can have is all the public transport operators and private industry working through one simple app, and then you choose what mode you want to do, how much you want to pay. So you might have, I'll choose 5 bus journeys, 6 bike journeys, I'll walk here, I'll choose a train, I'll take a Free Now taxi. And that will give you the best price combination for you. That will then assist the city as we look towards sustainability and accessibility. So for me and Dublin Bus at the board as a CEO, it's what is accessibility? You have to define that. And if it's physical access, that's a very narrow view. So we say, look, is public transport accessible to everybody? The stats are up there around job, people who are active in jobs at 30% if you have a disability, and the stats are there around the earning income. You need to make it accessible from a price point of view, and then they can access the service, and then they can get another job. So that's something that we need to look at. What's the price, the physical aspects of it, and then you got to make it super easy to use, and that's what's come through here. Like, it's not easy to use the whole ecosystem. Yeah. Technology can deliver that if it's planned correctly, if everybody's engaged in it, and if we take on board everybody's points, as Elaine said, at the design phase. And then it's just, look, this is good for everyone. So that's where I see technology hopefully benefiting all users.
Yeah,
so.
I'd agree with Ray, actually. I think accessibility has to be from design, from day dot. And it's, all these things, sustainability, accessibility, safety, gender, all these pieces, they don't progress in silos. So, really, you have to consider everything when you're looking at, and financial inclusion as well. So when you're looking at, sustainability, have you considered accessibility? Have you considered the price point, but it is that collaboration that's required.
But then who is responsible for driving that, like Alan, who's going to be the person that says, like when you think of all the hurdles that need to be overcome, what are the key challenges and how do you bring everyone together?
I think as everyone said, it is sort of working in collaboration with all starting with the users and then all the key stakeholders who need to deliver this. I think, maybe to pick a key challenge for us is that infrastructure piece. I think, people get hung up on the vehicle. We're now 100% accessible. Dublin Buses fleet 100% accessible. We're seeing more accessible taxis. But it's the infrastructure going around that to enable people to use it. We, as I say, from a Bus Éireann point of view, 5,000 bus stops throughout the country. At this point, we're probably about 1,300 are accessible. So that's probably a key challenge for us is working with all the stakeholders to improve the accessibility at each of those stops. And that is not going to happen overnight. And I think as I mentioned, the funding from the NTA, 12.5 million, that's really welcome. But with that number of bus stops to make accessible, that'll need to happen if we really want to achieve the goal of making public transport accessible to everyone, everywhere. And again, we can see the benefits where users, a good example in Sligo, where we had a customer who knew accessible buses within accessible bus stop, was able to attend Sligo IT, complete their course, and it really we can all see the benefits. But I think it is that challenge if there's getting everyone working on the same agenda and the investment going in. I think even when we have that investment, even specifically in bus stops, I had the opportunity myself with Spinal Injuries Ireland to spend a day in a wheelchair and use that on our services to just experience firsthand those key challenges. And I have to admit, it was enlightening. And I say we can hear the feedback from our customers, but when you experience it yourself, it is difficult. And I think for me, it was the learning was, well, how do we make even the simplest thing that little bit easier? I think someone touched on it earlier, even getting to a bus stop, and then there's a little lip on the curb. And I struggled. And I spent about 12 hours. I went out to Navan, even getting around Navan, and just that infrastructure piece, bus stop, curbs, pavements. It is, we have so much work to do to really make everywhere accessible.
And that was 12 hours.
12 hours.
Try that 365.
But
it's really good learning, isn't it?
It was, and I think that's where we found that sort of the opportunity to do that. It really helped. I suppose focus us as a business as to really we need to work hard to. I think we're making great strides. We are making improvements, but we do have a long way to go.
Yeah, Elaine, there was Free Now carried out a survey with Irish Wheelchair Association members in advance of this event, and 38% said that better education and disability awareness of drivers would make Ireland's transport network more accessible. And in general, in the public, 24% agreed that greater public awareness would in terms of passenger etiquette, would improve the public transport system. But do you think that does that chime with your experience? Is it about awareness? Is it about Alan getting into a wheelchair and walking the walk or not walking the walk?
I think awareness is huge. I think training is still massively required. At the moment, my understanding is that in certain areas people have training when they first acquire, say, taxi drivers, a taxi licence. I would say taxi drivers need ongoing training. Any customer-facing person in service delivery needs to update their training regularly. And I think part of that needs to be really listen to the people they're engaging with. Don't assume that you know what a person needs. Absolutely. It's key. Awareness training is awareness and training on how to deliver your service best to customers is essential, yeah. And
in the wider public as well, because I think, it's everybody's responsibility to call out things that they see that are not accessible, or do you think there's a lack of awareness within the wider public?
I think there's a huge lack of awareness in the wider public. I think there's a huge lack of awareness among policymakers. Everybody's journey begins at home. So if you need to go to a bus stop or a train station or a Lewis stop, you need to get to that place. I have walked around without a care in the world, knowing that I can see most things well enough for years. Now I'm experiencing a huge level of anxiety, which is new, because policies that involve shared space mean that I am now in danger and have had lots of experiences of either being mowed down by bikes and scooters or almost being mowed down, or tripping over new barriers that are appearing to separate cycle tracks from the road that just happen to be the same colour as the road, so I can't see them. So I've had so many tumbles, near misses, interchanges with cyclists telling me to get off the cycle track when I'm actually on what used to be the footpath for years. It's just not working. It's huge lack of awareness among policymakers who are going along with this, and I know it's well intentioned, but it is not helping older people. It's not helping anyone who lives with a disability, and it's really increasing anxiety levels. Some people are staying at home. Some people are resorting to using taxis that are very expensive, because the taxi will pick them up at the door, and they now don't need to navigate any of this difficult terrain. So yeah, there's a huge piece of work. I see ads on telly about motorists keeping away from cyclists. I would really like to see the same going into cyclists and cyclists' behaviour in relation to pedestrians, because if a pedestrian doesn't have a safe space, where are they? The footpath should be a safe space, and that has been eroded. And policy has done that. So it has introduced a whole new layer of difficulty for people who already have difficulties getting around.
Yeah, and that was probably done without proper consultation. There just wasn't enough people at the table to give the opinions to go, have you thought about where I'm going to go?
Yeah, I mean, part of getting funding for things is having to take a box that says you consulted, but consultation isn't an end in itself. Consultation needs an outcome, and people need to be listened. So there need to be positive, to be listened to. There needs to be positive outcome from consultation. It needs to actually make a difference, rather than tick a box that says, yeah, we met them. It doesn't.
Yeah, there needs to be action. There's no point talking about it, you need to do it.
Yeah.
And I suppose, we're kind of coming to the end now, but I don't want to say post-pandemic, because I don't feel things are entirely over, but we are hopefully emerging from a pandemic. We are reimagining how we plan our cities in future in terms of addressing the climate crisis. We're going to have a huge investment in public transport in the coming decade. This is kind of a once-in-a-decade opportunity for us to do things right. So I might say to you, Ray, considering that so many people use Dublin Bus, but what do you see in the next 5 years in terms of how the travel network will change in the next 5 years?
Well, we touched on technology. People's journeys are going to be much more fragmented in terms of they'll use a lot more modes, and that'll be their aspirations and the desire. I think from a policy point of view, huge investment coming, so crucial for the economy, so crucial for the city and the people. You need to design everything into it very early, because there'll be no rolling back from it. So it'll take 30, 40 years to undo it. So I think I mentioned earlier, for me, it's empathy and engagement. Try and seek to understand what all stakeholders want. You look at universal design, so it can be done. If you get that at the early stages, then, as Elaine said, the policymakers and everybody comes together and say, look, this is what we're going to set out to do. Now, set down the targets. As a CEO of a company, you have to have targets. You have to treat them seriously. And that's when you'll get things done. And so I think once you set that out, but, people have to take the time now to say, is everybody comfortable with what we're going to do? You can't meet everybody's needs all the time, but you can meet the vast majority, get it done right, and then say, okay, is everybody behind it? And then full steam ahead. You do need the policymakers to really understand, and that's why I made the point earlier, the people who understand and get the most efficient decisions, and generally the best decisions, are the ones closest to the customer. They must be listened to, and that engagement needs to take place now.
Great. Does anyone else have any final thoughts that they'd like to add?
I think maybe just on Ray's point, I think that what will the future look like? I think, and Fiona touched on that, fully integrated public transport network, whether it be sort of, they talk about the first mile, last mile, whether it be taxis and the public transport. I think how as a society we put that together and say that, that it is fully integrated, it is seamless for whoever is using public transport. I think that we all know the benefits public transport brings in sort of social inclusion. I think that's the future we need. How do we get it really integrated and seamless, and I think that's I think with the investment in Connecting Ireland, Bus Connects, everything that's going on, I think the opportunity is there, and I think that is what we're working towards.
I describe that as choice. So if you can offer choice, and every member of society should be able to participate fully, and transport actually can facilitate that.
I think you're all going to be very busy for the next 5 years trying to deliver all of that, and I have no doubt that you will, because it's a rights issue. Everybody has a right to get to where they want to go safely, and thank you so much for teaching me about it, and I hopefully sparking some thoughts and inspiring people to make the effort and to create the awareness and to put themselves in the shoes of other people. And thank you so much to Fiona, to Ray, to Alan, and to Elaine. Thank you so much.